Hello, I'm Sin with the Ozen Dojo. In this video, I'm going to cover how to import data from a spreadsheet in order to automatically generate Maltego graphs. Now, if you followed along with the last two videos, you should already be familiar with the concept of creating and modifying custom entities. While you can utilize these entities by manually building your graph piece by piece, Maltego also allows you to automate this process, whether by importing spreadsheets, creating custom transforms, or leveraging machines. Before we begin importing our data, we must first make sure that we have all the necessary entities that we want to use. And if you'd like to follow along, I've added a link to the file that contains all the custom entities we cover in this video in the description below. To import custom entities from a file, we first click on the Entities tab here and then on Import Entities. Select the file containing your custom entities and then click on Next. If you only want to import some of your entities, or perhaps you'd like to see what it is you're importing, simply click on the plus sign here to expand your options. As you can see, we're importing a crime entity under the events category, as well as multiple entities under the Interpol category. You can also choose whether or not you want to import the custom icons included with your entities. If you also want the icons uploaded, you simply check this box here before clicking Next. We've now successfully imported our entities, and as you can see, we have 5 new entities as well as 4 new icons. This is because our crime entity utilizes an existing stock icon that already exists within Maltego. Now, let's click Finish, and then go up to the Import Export tab, and now we're going to choose Import a Third-Party Table. Our first option here is the mapping configuration. So if you don't have any saved, this is going to default to New. If you have a mapping configuration that you're going to use often, I highly recommend saving those settings so you don't have to go through and redo these steps every time you import new data. Since we don't have a configuration saved, let's simply choose our spreadsheet and then click on Next. Now, we must choose how we want the data from our spreadsheet to be linked. The bottom here gives you an explanation of each of the options. Fully meshed means that all entities will be connected to all other entities. Sequential means that each entity is connected to the one that comes before it. And then tree means that all entities are connected to the very first entity. We're going to choose manual, which means that the user is going to establish all of these links manually. This screen shows us the data from our spreadsheet and allows us to choose what entities we want each of the columns to be mapped to. The data in this spreadsheet is information I pulled from Interpol's public red notice database. First, let's resize our window so we can see all of our available data. Now, Maltego automatically tries to detect what it thinks is correct based on the data you imported, but it's always a good idea to make sure you go through and check all of your options. For example, the header and type setting has defaulted to first row is headers. Now, in our case, this is correct, as the first row in our spreadsheet is a header, and we don't actually want Maltego to create an entity based out of that information. However, if this is not the case for your data, then you can choose a more suitable option here, such as the option for no headers. Next up, we see our columns have an entity type that Maltego guessed based on the data the columns contain. Unfortunately, in our case, these are not the correct entities we want to use, so we're going to click Unmap All. Now what we can do is manually assign our own entities to each of these columns. I want to assign the first 2 columns of data, both the issuing NCB as well as the NCB country, to the same Interpol NCB entity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the first column, hold down the control key, and then select the second column. Then we're going to choose the Interpol NCB entity here from the drop-down menu. The next 5 columns are all data points I'd like mapped to a single red notice entity. And for the last 2 columns, I want to map each of them to their own unique crime entity. Now that we've done our initial groupings, we need to go back and map out each column to the correct property within the entities that we initially assigned them to. If we click here on property, we can see the different property within the Interpol NCB entity that we can choose to map to. This one is actually correct, so let's move on to the red notice entity. As you can see, this one's a little bit mixed up. The data within our columns and the properties they're assigned to don't match up as they should. So I'm just going to go through and assign each one to the correct property value. And finally, for the crime entities, we don't actually need to make any changes, as the only value we're assigning here is going to be the main property value of which crime was committed. Now, to map out the links between our entities, we have 2 options. We can create these links using the connectivity graph, or we can do so via the connectivity table. I personally find the connectivity graph to be easier, as it lets you visualize it the same way it would exist on a Maltego graph. In order to create links here, we're just going to simply click and drag from one entity towards the entity we want it to be connected to. Now, if you'd rather use the connectivity table, you can simply check the boxes where you want the links coming from on the entity to the left, and then going to on the entity at the top column. One last thing to look at before we create our entities is the option to map columns to links. Here, we can assign any column to have their data included on the links that we just created. Now, our example doesn't actually use this, but it's still a good option to be aware of. If we click Next, we get a few more options. Now, we want Maltego to import all of our rows, but there's also the option to import every n row as well. We also want to be sure that Maltego does not create any entities where we have blank values, and to trim any leading or trailing white spaces within our data. We also have the option of importing only part of the data rather than all of it. We also want Maltego to merge the same links, and we're going to choose to import our data to the current graph that we already have open. Finally, we're going to save this mapping configuration so that we can use it again in the future if we want to import similar data. Now, after we click Next, we can see that we successfully imported all 4 rows of data, which created 12 entities as well as 9 links. If we click Finish here, we can now see our links and entities on our map. Our graph now includes all the entities we created, as well as the links we established between them, and we can even see that the different property values, such as the country flag, the wanted person's photo, and their date of birth, also displays as overlays. Now, this is the most basic way of automatically mapping out data into a Maltego graph. But what if you wanted to pull information from a live source rather than from a static spreadsheet? Well, in our next video, we're going to take a look at how to create custom transforms in order to further automate your Maltego investigations.